but I just wanted to welcome everyone. This is a very special presentation that we're so pleased to have. I want to thank Rosemary, of course, who has been the person to spearhead our honor project for our team, recognizing the need to take care of each other, but also to really celebrate our patients and the privilege that we have to take care of them. I also want to thank Mary for coordinating all of this. It's just been fantastic that she's been able to send out the invitations to everyone. So I wanted to introduce just briefly the two speakers today, or guests. Caitlin Paulson is a rising senior at Harvey Mudd College, and she is majoring in engineering and human-centered design. And Anya Zimmerman-Smith, she is a Claremont McKenna College class of 21, so she just graduated. She's majored in human-centered design, has worked on projects including redesign of disaster and emergency services, community open space usage, and nurse navigation services. She worked for 4 years at the Hive Center for Collaborative Creativity at the Claremont Colleges, which is redirected by Fred Leighton. He has joined us today, so thank you so much for coming. So Anya is now pursuing a career in design research with a special focus on healthcare. So I just turn it over to them and thank them again for participating and welcoming all of you for this special event.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Chang, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. We're really excited to share what we have with you. So without further ado, can everybody see my screen? Cool. So to start off, this past spring, Anya and I worked together for her thesis in human-centered design and my independent study. And we explored the process of addressing grief and celebrating life through UCSF's honor project. And in today's presentation, we'll explain kind of our process, introduce you to some of the people we met, and share with you just what our work was and its outcomes. Make sure I'm clicked here. So before we begin, we want to invite you to join us in a little bit of a warm-up activity. So if you came to the last presentation, you'll know what this is, but if you could start with just taking a moment to close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, think about a time where you were grieving the loss of someone or something. This could be a friend, a family member, or even a patient. And as this is coming to mind, I encourage you to notice what comes up for you. What practices did you use to mitigate this grief and move through it? Who were you able to talk to? When you're ready, you can open your eyes. And if you feel comfortable, we'd love for a few volunteers to share either in the chat or out loud just 2 or 3 words about what helped you to overcome this grief.
I'll go first. Well, at first, first reaction for me is my human reaction of fighting it off, right? Trying to fight the grief, trying to get it off my way, and well, great way to. I mean, I always remember just when I used to be a neuro-onc, talking with the doctors there, but always helped me walking around, just getting off Parnassus, walking down Parnassus on the streets, and just thinking, brainstorming through on my own, and then coming back up the hill. Kind of that cardio probably helped, but yeah, that's the way I did it.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Margareta.
I like to talk about it. So just having, yeah, I just like to, I think I like to talk to somebody about it, just even acknowledge how I'm feeling. But yeah, that's how I go. That's how I work.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both for sharing, and thank you all for taking a moment and doing that warm-up exercise with us. That's something that we love to do in human-centered design. We love to start with a warm-up and get ourselves in the right headspace to think about a problem. So to start off with a little background on Anya and I, and thank you, Dr. Chang, for those introductions. We are both human-centered design majors from the Claremont colleges. We're about an hour southeast of LA. And at the Claremont colleges, the Hive, also known as the Rick and Susan Sontag Center for Collaborative Creativity, is the center through which we both learned about human-centered design. So human-centered design is a framework and a process for approaching complex design challenges. And this could be for a variety of applications. These challenges can range from designing experiences or services to designing marketing strategies or products. And so I'll just walk you through what this process looks like for a little bit of a background on the type of work that we do. So the first stage of the design process is empathy. Empathy work involves working to deeply understand your user, the person you're designing for, through interviews, observations, and research. The next step is define. In the define step, we try to capture our user and their needs, typically by synthesizing hundreds of discrete points into one or two main insights. Then we ideate. This is where we try and develop as many ideas as we can, brainstorming creative, wild, and sometimes impossible solutions. Next, we prototype. Our method is to try and fail fast and create ideas with $1 or 1 minute. The first prototypes really seek to answer a question and understand. And then we test. We test out our ideas with a user or potential users to understand our own lack of understanding. And then this cycle repeats itself iteratively. So for a little background on the project, in the fall of 2020, Anya and I had the opportunity to work with an organization known as the Brain Tumor Network, which is a nonprofit organization and free patient navigation resource. And this opened up our eyes to the world of patient and caregiver navigation. At the beginning of this past spring semester, the two of us wanted to continue learning about ways to improve the experience for medical professionals, and were connected with UCSF through a nurse from the Brain Tumor Network. This led us eventually to Rosemary, who shared with us about the Honor Project and her desire to share it with more healthcare teams. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Honor Project, which I'm not sure how many of you are or are not, it's a monthly practice that brings the entire team together to honor the patients who have passed that month. We'll start our presentation by sharing a video we created at the end of our semester that tells the story of the practice known as the Honor Project.
Meet Emily. Emily is an experienced and devoted neuro-oncologist. Although she loved her work, she often felt worn out by the inevitability of death. Over the years, she found herself desensitized to death, building up a wall between herself and her patients. This is what successful physicians do, she told herself. This is how you maintain sound judgment and remain professional. This is how you survive. Until one day, her chief introduced the Honor Project. The Honor Project is a space and a practice where the entire multidisciplinary team gathered together each month to honor the patients who had died and support one another, sharing stories, memories, reflections, songs, and chocolate. This isn't for me, Emily thought. She was built for oncology. The very next day, she received news that a longtime patient had suddenly died. His love of wood carving and kind demeanor reminded her of her own father. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that dealing with death was a part of her job. Later that day, the chief offered her the opportunity to write the patient's name on a card and place it on a shelf in a shared team space. Although she was hesitant, she deeply admired and respected her chief. She wrote the patient's name on the card and added it to the shelf with the names of other patients who had died that month. Each name represented not just a patient, but a person that the entire team had come to know. Later that month, the team gathered for the Honor Project. Although Emily was skeptical of the practice, she wanted to show support for her colleagues. As they began to share, she realized that everyone, from the doctors and nurses to the researchers and administrative staff, was impacted by every patient in some way. Upon reading the patient's name aloud, Emily hesitated, and then began to share how fond she was of him, how he reminded her of her own father, whom she had lost in her early 20s, something she rarely spoke about. As each of her colleagues shared, it seemed that the whole patient came to life in the face of their death. That was her first time joining the Honor Project, and as time went on, it was a ritual she grew to look forward to each month. It was a time to pause and a place to express her emotions, a way to feel closer to her colleagues, and an opportunity to celebrate the lives of patients that she was so grateful to be a part of. And though at first she thought she didn't need something like the Honor Project, now she couldn't imagine doing this work without it.
Okay. I'm going to pass it off to Anya.
So we'll circle back and kind of contextualize that video for you in a bit. But before we wanted to really dive in, we wanted to give a quick overview of what this process has looked like. So we use a program called Mural to do our work. And from these screenshots, you can get a sense of just how extensive our project has been. It's been countless sticky notes, tons of Zoom meetings, loads of research papers, and hundreds of text messages between ourselves. We've learned throughout this project just how messy and iterative this process is. And at the end of this presentation, we'll share some more reflections on human-centered design. So after learning about Rosemary's desire to spread the Honor Project, our design goal became to capture and communicate the Honor Project's meaning, importance, and impact in order to share it with other healthcare teams. So essentially, we met Rosemary and saw the great impact of the Honor Project at UCSF, and that it solved some of the needs around support for navigators and healthcare workers dealing with loss that we discovered at the Brain Tumor Network and in our research on navigation. So we were really excited to see that this solution existed and thought, this is like something we had wanted to make, but we don't have to reinvent it. We can just work to spread it instead. And additionally, our initial goal for the project was to put something into the world and really have an impact. So it seemed like the perfect opportunity to make the biggest difference. So our problem became seeing if there's a need for this beyond UCSF and defining that need more clearly, then gathering insight on how the Honor Project actually helps and discovering any barriers to the adoption of a program like this. And then lastly, creating materials to get it into the world and show other places that it would be helpful and that they should implement it.
With this design goal in mind, we were ready to embark into our process. However, over the course of the semester, we found that it didn't quite look like this. It looked a lot more like this. It was messy and iterative, and often we didn't know what step to take next or where we're going.
So now we'll dive into our steps. So the first step of our process was to understand the needs that exist for healthcare workers experiencing loss and grief. And since we gathered insights in our work with BTN and research we did prior on navigation, we wanted to do some super broad research, synthesize all these insights to get a general understanding of the culture around grief acknowledgement and support in healthcare teams, specifically oncology and neuro-oncology teams. And we discovered these insights through our interviews with the Brain Tumor Network Project, with UCSF Brain Tumor Center staff, some of you are here, and research we did on navigation, studies on the impact of grief on oncologists, and personal experiences of physicians and nurses posted on Quora, which is a public question and answer site that proved to be really helpful. So the unaddressed grief in these settings has many impacts, as you can guess, And we defined three main areas. That's the impact on the individual healthcare worker, the impact on healthcare worker teams, and the secondhand impact on patients. So I'll go through each of these three. So for the individual, through our interviews with BTN staff and beyond, we heard many variations of this sentiment. I think it's really important as a healthcare professional to protect yourself. You need to be able to put this barrier between you and your patient. It sounds harsh. You want to give them everything you have. It comes down to self-preservation. So especially in neuro-oncology, which, as many of you know, is most always a terminal disease, we heard that it was really hard to balance being positive for patients when they're most likely going to end up passing away. So the solution that we heard from these healthcare workers that they found was just to shut out all feelings in order to get through the day and do their jobs. But for every comment about needing to shut it out, there was a comment like this saying, "We're physicians, not robots. We have every human emotion every other person on earth has." So that sentiment, coupled with this culture that we heard about that implies that medical professionals are, supposed to be purely logical and that they can't make rational decisions if they're emotionally involved, created kind of an endless battle between the emotional side and the logical side of these healthcare workers, which was an experience that they just didn't have the tools to work through. So they would just, choose the logical side. And lastly, we heard oncologists are trained on loss from a patient and family perspective, but not trained on how to deal with the loss ourselves. So cementing the emotional difficulty of these situations is that the focus is just on taking care of the patient and the family and teaching them how to deal with loss, but without training the healthcare worker on how to deal with those feelings and emotions as well. So moving on to the impact of this grief on the team. When it came to the team, what really stuck out was the lack of structure or community space or conversation about these topics. Most clinics and organizations don't have a place or program to foster sharing on this topic, so there was only an informal connection about it in some teams. And additionally, we learned that frequent experiences such as this physician's, who said that the unique thing about grieving for them as a physician is that they usually have to grieve alone, was just really often the case because all of the internal and personal acts of putting up walls to deal with difficult emotions created a culture of people putting up these walls with each other and not talking about it and feeling like if they do express their emotions, they won't be taken seriously, or they'll be regarded less highly, or that their objectivity might be questioned. And then lastly, we also heard that sometimes one might feel a power dynamic between different staff members, and that higher ups really set the tone when it comes to vocalized mourning. So this showed us that the tone around grief is learned from those in charge, and that there's a great opportunity to have a positive impact on the department and the rest of the staff from higher ups. And then lastly is the impact, is how this unaddressed grief affects patients secondhand. And we read in several studies that discomfort with their grief can affect decisions healthcare workers make with subsequent patients, which is a really crucial thing to be aware of. And we also learned that, next slide, the tension between growing close enough to care about the patients, but remaining distant enough to avoid the pain of loss when the patient dies, has been seen to make physicians and healthcare workers maybe suggest more aggressive treatment for a patient when perhaps palliative care would be better. And additionally, just can really affect how they engage with and communicate with patients and their families. And the next quote just kind of shows that it can lead to just a general withdrawal from patients and their families. So from all of this information, all these things we heard and read about, you can see that the effect of loss and grief on healthcare professionals is very profound and very complex. So once we knew that, we wanted to define what the Honor Project does in hopes of showing people that it solves these needs around loss that we found to exist. So Caitlin will talk about what the Honor Project does.
Awesome, thank you. So here are the different areas of impact that we outline the honor project having, and a lot of this came from conversations with you all, and just sort of learning about what exactly you have identified works well. And so I'll outline each of these in a little more detail on the coming slides. It's just a lot healthier to acknowledge that clinicians have emotions too. From our interviews, we learned that many believe there's a culture that doctors are not supposed to get emotional, but by creating this intentional space within the workday where everyone can gather with this purpose of sharing their emotions, this idea or stereotype can be challenged. The honor project absolutely helps me do my job, because even if I don't have direct patient contact, I can think more thoroughly about the kinds of circumstances or the richness of their lives that they bring in that I don't necessarily know. We also found through our interviews that the honor project helps everyone do their jobs better and increase job satisfaction. Especially for those who don't have direct patient contact, the honor project can increase the sense of meaning in the work they do. I was able to witness people who I respect greatly and doctors who intimidated the hell out of me being incredibly human and incredibly feeling about their motivations and experiences. So along those same lines as before, the honor project cultivates this sense of empathy. It's a practice that allows the different backgrounds to come together and understand one another's experiences. A doctor will never have the same experience that a social worker has, and a nurse will never have the same experience that a clinical trial researcher has, but they all have experiences in and around the patient's life. So by bringing these experiences into the same room, it can help really create this empathy between the disciplines. I think for families to hear that the medical team cared after the fact is really touching. To know that these people who cared for you and cared for your patient still think of you for a moment is really powerful. So at UCSF, a team shares the postcard with the caregiver and the family of the patient that died. And this can be an immense source of comfort for the family to know that their family member was recognized and honored by their medical team. People say, so many people have died this week, it's going to be a tough month. But then they say, okay, I don't have to think about this now because I have the honor project coming up in 2 weeks. I can allow myself to really be present with the group at that time and focus on work now. We found overall that the honor project helps the team compartmentalize and process their grief. And through our research, we also found that the practice prevents burnout. Without having space to process grief and process just how difficult this work is, it's common for healthcare professionals to burn out. An astounding 6 in 10 oncology physicians report severe levels of burnout. And the economic cost of physician burnout in the medical industry is $4.6 billion a year. The honor project has been a primary resource in feeling connected to my colleagues. This was one of the biggest things we heard through our interviews, is just the source of connection that gets generated through the practice. We get to celebrate the lives of the patients and the privilege that we've been able to have to be a part of the patient's journey at a very difficult time. And this one, I think perhaps most importantly, it's centered around the patients, and it's a chance to honor the very people that brings the team together.
So with all of these benefits of the honor project and its great impact for 4 years at UCSF, we wondered, why isn't this spreading? And we identified 5 areas of potential barriers to its implementation in other departments and organizations. So the first is just time constraints. In this area of work, as you all know, everyone is pressed for time, and there's always an idea of, could I be doing something more important, or maybe something more clinical is more important. And there's an idea of the financials of time and just trying to figure out, is this saving or making us money? So that's something we kind of came across in our interviews that potentially prevented people of taking on the honor project. And secondly is what we've mentioned before, this medical stigma around needing to stay emotionless in order to be objective and do one's job well, and kind of this fear of the floodgates opening. You go to the honor project, you start speaking about some of your thoughts and feelings, and a fear that you might not be able to stop them, and it will just get in the way of the work that you do. And then next is kind of a built for this ideology, which we heard from a variety of people, this idea that you can either inherently handle the difficulties of working around so much death, or you can't, and that there's just not much you can do to change the effects of that, and how you deal with loss. And the honor project really challenges that and says, there is a way to build resilience in this area. So that might be a source of tension when people learn about the honor project. And then next is a physician mindset / mentality that death equals failure. And often there's a focus on curing versus caring, which can lead to an avoidance toward talking about death. And there can sometimes be this mentality that physicians don't want to accept that they can't do anything more, that they don't want to admit defeat. And this can lead to an attitude of death meaning failure. And, if that's the case, then how could you possibly get together and talk about the patients who've died? So that came up as something really strong that we heard from people that might be at odds with the honor project and people's acceptance of it. And then last is this culture of caring for grieving patients, but not the grieving self. And that the patient, is always the bottom line as the priority. But the honor project challenges that, and by saying, this will benefit the patient positively, but you need to take care of yourself first in order to take care of them. And it just really recognizes that the best patient care comes after personal care. So after seeing the needs, the impact, and the potential barriers, we were ready to create materials to communicate the honor project in a way that would land well and communicate its potential.
Awesome. Yeah, we took you through a little whirlwind there. But now looking at kind of what we created from all this information, to capture this complex narrative, Rosemary suggested we create a video. And so the video was intended to be a place where kind of all these insights that we just shared with you could be gathered in a much more succinct and personable way. And this video went through several iterations, and in each iteration, we learned more from Rosemary or our interviews or gathering feedback from friends and family. So here you can see some of our early drafts of the video to the one that you just saw. There were a few key components that we wanted the video to have. The first is that we wanted the video to be centered around the perspective of a neuro-oncologist, because this was sort of our target audience for the video. We wanted the story to be one that resonated with them, and by telling this in a narrative format, we hoped that our audience would empathize with Emily or perhaps even see themselves in her. Secondly, we wanted the concept of the honor project to be introduced by the chief, because as Anya mentioned in our interviews with some physicians at other hospitals, we found that the chief can really be the one who sets the tone about how the community processes grief. And finally, perhaps the biggest challenge we faced in creating this video was balancing how we address the skepticism about the honor project. So we wanted to strike kind of this middle ground between effectively communicating its incredible positive impact, but also acknowledging and empathizing with a neuro-oncologist's potential skepticism. We received a lot of different feedback from sharing different iterations of this video, and from wanting to see the cost of such a program addressed to a more practical how-to guide, how to actually get this started. But one piece of feedback we were particularly proud of was someone who told us that the video really captured the spirit of the honor project. And kind of capturing that intangible spirit was something that we set out to do in telling the story of the honor project. So in feedback from the video, we learned, people wanted more guidance, more detail. So we created this implementation guide, which kind of tells just in text format a little bit what it's about, its impact, and some steps if you want to make it happen at your local clinic. And after creating the video and implementation guide, Dr. Chang advised that we create some sort of survey that could allow people to express interest in the honor project. So in filling this out, they could say, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about the honor project. They could also tell us, what's something you still need help with? Do you need help getting team members on board or gathering the necessary supplies? They could also leave us additional feedback, so kind of anything that came up in either watching the video or however kind of they came across this opportunity. And finally, a space to just collect their email addresses, which has proved really useful in coordinating conversations about how to actually get this going. And after that, we realized that we needed a place for all of this material to live. So we created the honorproject.org, which is a website that houses the video, a lot of the quotes that you saw throughout this presentation, the implementation guide, and also if you select that you want to start the honor project, it gives you the opportunity to go through that interest form and connect you with us.
So once we created all these materials, we needed to think who would be best to send them to and how we should send them. And, as we've mentioned before, and it's on our research, the head physicians really set the tone when it comes to these topics. And team members are more likely to go to programs like this if the neuro-oncologist or individual in charge brings the idea to the clinic. So we wanted to send it directly to them. And Dr. Chang kindly sent it from her email, which we thought would have more of an impact from someone in the community with such high regard and standing. And next, you can see the places our materials were shared with. Many of the top institutions across the country. And we were very overwhelmed by the number of responses we received, especially given the caliber, as you can see, of the institutions we sent the materials to. And their support has been very exciting, obviously, and has really validated the work we've done. And so far, MD Anderson, Dana-Farber, Duke Cancer, Miami Cancer Institute, City of Hope, and National Institute of Health have either expressed interest in or have implemented the honor project. And we continue to follow up with the individuals who express interest and really look forward to seeing who else tries to implement it and the impact that it has. And here you can just see some feedback from that initial email.
So in closing, Anya and I just wanted to share a few reflections on both this opportunity and human-centered design as a process. So this past semester was an incredible chance to learn about a practice that has the opportunity or the potential to impact a wide array of medical teams. Human-centered design was kind of the framework and the toolkit that we use to capture these insights and represent them as the materials you saw at the end of this presentation. But this process of exploring, connecting, and reflecting is one that can really help spread and raise awareness about important practices like the honor project that are doing so much good.
And one last thing, just a reflection, something that became really clear to me through this work is that healthcare really mirrors human-centered design. Diagnosing takes empathy and problem solving, and treating takes ideation and prototyping, among other things. And it just showed that the medical field, is really good at curing and at focusing on the technical, and that aspects of the emotional and environmental experience of healthcare can sometimes get lost in the fray. So I think HCD can be the perfect tool to amplify and improve that feeling aspect because of its similarity to medical practices already. So that is all we have to share with you today. We're so grateful for everyone who's able to attend, and a special thank you to our advisor, Professor Fred Leichter, and to Rosemary Rossi and Dr. Chang. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to make this impact without you. So if you have any questions or you're curious to learn more, we'd love to hear.
Well, thank you so much. That was incredible. Thank you again, Anya and Caitlin. We'll just open it up. So I think, Mary, you had your hand up, or you were clapping.
That was an applause, little
applause.
response, but thank you. But I'll take this moment to say, great job, you guys. So impressed. Really comprehensive, really well thought out, nice balance of left brain and right brain, and just great job.
Thank you.
I know that palliative care is a relatively new field, but what are the efforts to, it seems like the honor project might be appropriate for hospice agencies. That might not be the whole picture. That might not be everything that they need. What's being done to bring hospice care to a higher standard? Kind of what you're talking about with the healthcare workers in neuro-oncology.
So maybe I can just address that briefly, but thank you so much for that comment. I think that the idea of how we grieve, whether you're in hospice, whether you're in infectious disease, and I can tell you that with COVID last year and still on, Rosemary reached out to a number of people who were dealing with a lot of death that they hadn't dealt with before, a lot of the ICUs, for example, in the hospitals. And it was a clear need, not only in neuro-oncology, we were very beneficial for us, but I think Rosemary, started this in the ICU over in the hospital, and then she extended it. There are a number of programs in New York and I think in Boston, where they realized that they needed a place for grief as well. And so your point is really a good one. And my hope with this video and this meeting that we have today, that we can extend it to other oncology groups, because the neuro-oncology is just one subspecialty in oncology, but so many of the other disease sites deal with loss of their patients as well. And so I think that the spark here is to say, this is an area that's unmet need for professionals who are dealing with loss. And how can we really do that? So, but thank you for that comment. Rosemary, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
I just that, yeah, our aspiration is to make this practice available to different settings, not just oncology clinics, but everywhere that people are suffering silently with grief and loss.
So there's an excellent question from Fred, always thinking about how we do this more globally. And maybe we can address how we did it in COVID, because we did it virtually. We had to pivot from meeting together in person, where we could sort of see each other. And actually we had at the end of our session a Lena hug, which was something that we really celebrated. We shared chocolate. So yeah, we had to adapt to COVID and switch completely to the virtual. So again, maybe Rosemary, you want to comment on that?
Yes, thanks. So I guess I first started, I pulled together a PowerPoint so there would be some visual, taking some of the key sort of steps of our in-person honor project. And we kept to the same framework of keeping the same time and inviting people to join the Zoom meeting each month. And then my wonderful colleagues, Naomi and Mary, thought of the idea of having a photo of our patient who had died, and we incorporated that into the PowerPoint slides. And so we really did as much as we can, just like today, being on Zoom together, and it's worked really beautifully. Paige, I don't know if you have any other questions about the virtual environment, but it's not as good as being in person, shoulder to shoulder, but it really served us well, and attendance is good, and we have a follow-up email for people who couldn't join, so it worked okay for us. Any other questions?
I just want to make a quick comment. One thing that we did in the on-site, like in-person honor project that has been kind of hard on the in virtual environment is sharing a song. And I don't know, Rosemary, did you talk about that part of it? Because that was kind of a big part too, the meditation, the song, before we did the chocolate.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. We still try to do the meditation on the Zoom. Of course, we can't share the chocolate. And the song, I send out a song afterwards in a follow-up email encouraging people to take time to read the poem or the meditation on their own and listen to the song. So the beauty of listening to the song, which is only about 2 or 3 minutes in person, was that this whole notion of taking rest in the middle of things and having time, even though it seems like, oh my God, I'm antsy, I can't stand here for 3 minutes where I have so many things to do, but there is this sense of replenishment and connection when people stand together and listen to a song. So yeah, that part we're not able to do on Zoom.
I'd like to make a comment. I'm Diane, and excuse me, my husband Mark died in 2018 and was treated at UCSF by the miraculous team. And I just wanted to say my response to learning about the Honor Project as the wife of someone who died from glioblastoma. And I was just so touched, I guess. I don't know if I could do this without crying. It felt like an extension of honoring my grief too. And I think that I was told that the song for the meeting where he was honored was a song he wrote, and I think it was played. There was a video of it, and that really touched me. So I am so grateful that you do this, and I hope it spreads all over the place. And the presentation was great. Thank you so much. It was really nice. I recently retired from teaching graduate students in nursing, and it just seeing the two of you do your presentation and hearing you just renewed my faith that that you and your generation are picking up the mess maybe that we're leaving behind in some ways, and are going to help make this a better world. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and I echo what you said about Anya and Caitlin. Thanks so much for your input.
I have a question. So I also thought your video was awesome. Your whole project was awesome. I had a really good meeting with the head of San Francisco Kaiser Hospice, and I would like to send them your video. Is it available? Is there a link to it somewhere?
Yeah, definitely. So the website that we showed in the presentation has the video in it. Can send the link to that in the chat. Oh, thank you, Mary. And that's kind of the resource to point them towards that has everything. So yeah, we would love that if you shared it. That's wonderful.
And I would say also, this actual meeting is being recorded. And so if you feel that would be something that would be valuable, so not just the information that's on the Honor Project, but sort of hearing from Anya and Caitlin, the process they went through and the challenges, I think if you'd like that too, we can sort of make that happen after this.
That's wonderful. And Dr. Chang, I want to tell you one thing that I remember about you that I love, which is when they had the all-day caregivers retreat, you were in the garage putting up signs telling people where to park beforehand. The head of Neuro-Oncology doing that. I was very impressed.
That's what you call boots on the ground. Thank you. Thank you. certainly a team effort.
I have a question. How do you think the program can be adapted for clinics that don't experience as much death and have higher rates of survivorship?
Perhaps having it sort of maybe quarterly or every 2 or 3 months. Maybe it's changing the frequency, and maybe changing a little bit of what it's for, because there might be incremental losses along the way. Their patients may not die, but there's loss that is experienced in different ways. So you might change the format to talk about that, and as a way to prevent burnout, to create empathy for different disciplines and join together and talk about some of the challenges. That might be an idea.
Thank you.
I think Ted, you're asking a really important question, which is there are other high symptom illnesses, right, where patients and families struggle. Mm-hmm. And that might be a way to think about it, is that, you hear about outcomes for patients that are very difficult and very challenging. And so you could, as Rosemary pointed out, you could sort of shift the focus to not death, but some other kind of, trauma that patient and family distress might be going through. And that obviously reflects on how you manage it as well, right? So I think it's really about understanding the how we do our work and where we have difficulties when we're connecting with patients and families. So
I really appreciate the flexibility of the model you've created. It seems like it's very easily adapted for specific clinics. So thank you.
Yeah.
As Dr. Chang mentioned, during COVID, I spoke with some Boston hospitals, and they adapted it to their, clinic, their ICU department. So right on the floor. So there is a way to work with, and happy to talk with you or anyone about it. I think one thing about the Honor Project is, in some ways, I sort of think of it as going from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth, and helping all of us grow through the pain of loss.
One thing I find interesting about this program is that it's so multidisciplinary. Everybody's been affected by this person, this throughout their care. And this Honor Project provides an opportunity for each person to express their feelings about that. And then people can understand each other. And I think it also provides growth within the setting for everybody to understand each other. I think there's other really great things that happen here. In addition to the grieving, it's everybody having a chance to understand each other. It's just really, it sounds like such a positive environment.
I think something that also comes out in the Honor Project is, we get to meet our patients at a time where it is such a huge transition of their lives and an impact on their lives because of the diagnosis of a brain tumor. And hearing the stories I find of what their life was like before and who they were as a person coming into this disease. I mean, I do it for my patients, but I just love to hear the stories and the richness of who they were. And that's what I really, find when we say we're celebrating them, we're celebrating the privilege that we have as physicians to be part of their lives at the most difficult time. And I think that just resonates every time we have an Honor Project. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful, to me, an enriching experience. So.
I just have a quick question, or actually just a comment. about one of the things, and actually, by the way, I love the video and I'd love to know how you did it, like what program you used to create it, because it's just so wonderful. That's kind of my first question, but then I just have a comment. One of the things I think that Rosemary, sorry, my phrasing. One of the things Rosemary does is she holds space and allows for tears, you know, and just, she has this intention that just allows for tears to flow. Because I think it could be a difficult experience for people going into it thinking, okay, I can't cry in this, like I have to be straight on. Okay. So I think that's kind of an important component too, just like allowing and being okay with tears. And I was really struck when I first started in neuro-oncology. I remember walking down the hallway and just passing by the clinic rooms, and one of the clinicians, a neuro-oncologist, just breaking down and crying and just like, you know, bawling in there. And that happened a couple of times in 1 month. And I was really kind of touched by that, that they kind of allowed the tears. And I think that's something that Rosemary does really well, is just kind of reminds us the tears are okay. So I don't know if I froze there. But.
No, thank you, Naomi.
So yeah, can I ask you that question about the program you used to create the video? I'm curious.
Yeah, we used a software for iPad called Procreate, which uses a stylus, Apple Pencil, and just this screen recording, just kind of stitched together. But I also love your point about holding space for tears. My boss at my current job made a comment on that the other day when a partner and I came and we're dealing with some stuff, and she had started to cry, and he has this bell on his desk and he celebrates like anytime a good thing happens, like new client project, finish a project, and she starts crying and he rings the bell and he's like, yep, tears are the most human thing. So I love that story. Thank you for sharing.
I think that another really important piece of what you're speaking about is who's leading the honor project. And that's something that we spoke about a lot, because obviously Rosemary has been really crucial to its success at UCSF. So, how do you find that right person in other locations who will foster the right community? And I think that's something that we or Rosemary can do more work on, how to find that right person and teach them how to lead it well. So I think it's a really great point you made.
Yeah, and I think it's just more about sort of within ourselves, each one of us cultivating a sense of self-compassion and curiosity and being with what is, and holding that within ourselves, and then it naturally emanates out to others. So I think setting intention is so important, and that most anyone can hold space if there's that intention to do so in that way. Yeah.
Okay, well, are there any other questions or comments for Anya and Caitlin? Yes, Fred.
I just want to thank you for providing this opportunity, and congratulate Caitlin and Anya again for this amazing work, and make one other comment that they might want to imagine they did this entire work remotely in a year when we weren't even getting together, and they were never in the same room with each other. So I don't know if you guys have any comments on what that was like, and pluses and minuses.
I think being remote actually allowed us to engage with people we may not have been able to in real life setting. Not sure if we've been able to get to UCSF otherwise. And it also, I think, kind of emboldened us to just say, okay, we're just going to email this person and see if we can set up a meeting and talk with them, which I think led to some collaboration that may not have happened otherwise. So obviously there are difficulties being apart, but it led to some really great things as well.
I wanted to just say I had never actually heard of the term human-centered design before this. And it was just really, really interesting to hear about the honor project that we all experienced from kind of an analytical perspective, but also, empathetic perspective. And I actually cried during this presentation at one point, hearing about you studying the honor project, which I usually cry at, which just shows kind of the impact of it. But I just wanted to say great job. It was really impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I was enlivened by my association with Anya and Caitlin, and I came at a time when I was just like running on empty, and every time I spoke with them, I felt really drawn back to my passionate purpose for doing what I do, and also my excitement for the future, and sort of, it was so fun to like dwell in possibility and work with them, and they're so mature and smart and kind, and it was just a wonderful experience. So, and I can't thank you enough, Anya and Caitlin, and of course Fred. Thank you so much for taking on the honor project.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone for attending, and especially for Anya and Caitlin for taking the time to review with us their work. So I hope everybody has a good rest of the day and week, and happy 4th of July. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Bye. Yeah, great job, you guys.